What if I told you somebody, maybe multiple somebodies, were searching those terms before September 10th? What do you think about that?
No one expected what the data would reveal. Just days before the tragic assassination of Charlie Kirk, an unusual digital pattern began to appear, one that mentioned a name the public hadn't yet heard: Tyler James Robinson. Buried within Google's search records was a curious trace of activity that left analysts asking how that name surfaced online before it became public knowledge. Before we get deeper into this investigation, make sure you subscribe for more stories that explore the deeper side of breaking news. In the aftermath of Charlie Kirk's death, researchers and journalists turned to online data to trace how information about the case had spread. What they discovered was unexpected. On September 9th, a full day before the incident, Google recorded a small but measurable rise in searches for Tyler James Robinson, primarily from Washington, D.C. At that time, the suspect's name had not been made public, and his connection to the event would not appear in the media until 2 days later. The finding was subtle, but statistically significant. Google Trends, which measures relative search interest, reported a regional value of 18 out of 100 for those searches in DC, a sign that, while the number of queries was low overall, they represented an unusual concentration within a single area. When viewed at the national level, the same term barely registered. Digital analysts were cautious not to draw premature conclusions. Search fluctuations happen for many reasons, and data samples can be distorted by small numbers. Still, the timing caught attention. DC is a city associated with policymaking, news agencies, and intelligence analysis, an environment where information moves quickly and unpredictably. In that context, even a minor search anomaly can raise questions about timing, access, and the ways information circulates before it reaches the public. When asked for comment, Google reiterated that regional spikes can appear exaggerated because of smaller user bases in localized areas. Experts noted that such patterns may reflect random interest or internal cross-referencing by individuals researching unrelated topics. Nonetheless, the proximity of the searches to the event has kept investigators and digital journalists interested in what it might signify. The pattern didn't stop there. Around the same period, another set of searches focused on a private jet with a tail number 9,888 kilograms. The plane was reported to have departed from Provo, Utah, shortly after the incident near Utah Valley University. Its transponder, a device that helps track aircraft, reportedly lost signal after takeoff, something aviation authorities later described as not unusual for the area. What drew notice was that online interest in this same aircraft had already appeared 1 day before the tragedy. While there is no verified explanation, some data specialists suggested that aviation hobbyists or flight tracking communities may have been responsible, as those groups frequently monitor regional traffic. Others viewed it as another intriguing coincidence worth documenting rather than dismissing outright. Then came a third digital footprint. Records showed that on September 8th, 2 days before the event, there were search queries from the DC region for the Loci Center, the Utah Valley University building later identified as part of the crime scene. Some of these searches referenced the building's structure and location. Again, there is no proof these searches were connected to the incident, but the timing prompted further analysis of how data signals can precede public awareness. The person who pieced these clues together was Baron Coleman, a former Alabama radio host who had gradually shifted his focus toward data journalism. For years, he had been known locally for his analytical curiosity and his preference for verifiable information over speculation. When most people turned to opinions or rumor, Coleman turned to data. His guiding philosophy was simple: if a pattern could be documented publicly and explained clearly, it deserved to be examined. After leaving broadcasting, Coleman immersed himself in open-source investigation, a field built on transparency and verification rather than privileged access. He believed that truth often hides not in secrets, but in public records waiting to be interpreted. It was this mindset that drew his attention to the strange digital footprints surrounding the Tyler James Robinson story and the events that followed.
And you can see here where the news breaks about the plane, evening of September 10th, the evening after the shooting.
Coleman began by using tools that anyone could access. His preferred instrument was Google Trends, a platform that tracks the frequency of search terms across different regions and time frames. It doesn't reveal identities or private details, but it can illustrate when collective curiosity begins to form. By comparing how often certain phrases are searched, one can observe subtle movements in public attention. He focused on several specific terms that had surfaced in early online discussions: Tyler James Robinson, Loci Center, 9,888 kilograms, and Mauser 98, the model of the rifle reportedly associated with the case. On their own, these words meant little. But Coleman wanted to know when people began searching for them and from where. The question wasn't who was searching, it was when the interest began and whether any pattern stood out. During a live stream of his analysis, Coleman guided viewers through the process step by step. His commentary was measured, careful, and technical. He adjusted filters by region, narrowed date ranges, and explained what each spike or dip might indicate. When a line rose unexpectedly, he cautioned against overinterpretation. His tone remained steady, more like a teacher than a provocateur. When he restricted results to searches originating from Washington, D.C., he noticed something unusual. The chart showed small but clear upticks in activity for several of those terms in the weeks leading up to the shooting. For instance, searches for Mauser 98 appeared in late August and again in early September, slight increases that would be invisible in a global dataset but noticeable when viewed locally. To the casual observer, the graph might have seemed insignificant. To someone familiar with data trends, however, the timing was curious. Coleman never claimed the pattern proved anything. In his own words, it merely suggested an unusual alignment of timing. He repeatedly emphasized that the results showed correlation, not causation. His goal was to demonstrate how digital behavior can reveal early shifts in public attention long before a story enters the news cycle. The findings were interesting, but he left interpretation open, inviting others to test and verify. The restraint in his presentation stood out. At a time when online narratives often leap to conclusions, Coleman's discipline drew quiet respect. Reporters who followed his work appreciated that he documented every step of his process and allowed others to reproduce it. Nothing was hidden. Every search, filter, and graph appeared live on screen. The audience could see exactly what he saw. Within days, his video circulated widely across investigative communities and social media. Many viewers praised his transparency, describing it as a model of responsible digital inquiry. Others, fascinated by the implications, began repeating his experiment. But soon, those attempting to recreate his charts encountered a problem. The same search spikes no longer appeared. The data that had once been visible seemed to have disappeared from Google Trends entirely. At first, the issue appeared to be user error. Perhaps people were choosing the wrong date range or entering terms incorrectly. But even after careful replication, the distinctive bumps in activity were gone. Screenshots and recordings from Coleman's original streams became the only remaining evidence that they had ever existed. Questions began to circulate about why the results had changed. Coleman addressed the matter in a calm, factual update. He explained that Google Trends data is dynamic, not archival. Because it relies on sampling rather than complete datasets, its visualizations can shift when search volumes fluctuate or when algorithms adjust their baselines. Small spikes may disappear if they fall below the platform's reporting threshold. What once looked like a signal could easily fade into statistical noise as time passes. His explanation aligned with what Google itself later confirmed in a public statement. The company clarified that variations in search results can occur for several reasons: algorithmic updates, sample recalibration, or the natural ebb and flow of search activity. They added that manual removal of data is extremely rare and reserved only for cases that violate policy, such as exposure of personal information or content that could cause harm. When such removals occur, they can inadvertently affect related datasets. To experienced data analysts, this made sense. Google Trends was designed to provide general insights, not serve as a permanent record. Its charts reflect real-time interest, which can fluctuate dramatically depending on new events, regional activity, or even time zone differences. But to the wider public, the disappearance felt less technical and more mysterious. The timing, occurring just after Coleman's findings gained attention, prompted speculation, though no direct evidence suggested interference. As discussion spread, a new layer of curiosity emerged. How much of what we see online is stable, and how much shifts beneath our feet without notice? Coleman's experience became a case study in the fragile nature of digital evidence. Many assume that once information appears on the internet, it remains accessible forever. Yet platforms like Google Trends remind us that digital records are more fluid than they seem, subject to constant recalibration by systems designed for relevance rather than permanence. For journalists, the episode offered both a tool and a warning. It demonstrated how powerful open-source data can be when used carefully, but also how easily context can vanish. Coleman's thorough documentation, his saved recordings, timestamped screenshots, and publicly shared files protected the integrity of his work even as the underlying data shifted. Without those records, his findings might have become another untraceable rumor. The incident also reignited conversations about transparency and public trust. When data disappears or changes, even for technical reasons, suspicion tends to fill the void. Explanations grounded in sampling models or algorithmic updates often sound abstract to the average person. Once doubt enters the equation, technical language rarely dispels it. That tension between expertise and perception lies at the heart of digital communication today. Coleman's work resonated because it navigated that tension without exploiting it. He acknowledged uncertainty rather than amplifying it, and by doing so, turned uncertainty into a teaching moment. His viewers didn't just watch him analyze a story. They learned how to think critically about data, how to distinguish between evidence and assumption, and how to handle ambiguity responsibly. Over time, the public conversation shifted from the details of the search spikes to broader questions about how digital information behaves. Scholars and data experts noted that Google Trends is a snapshot tool, not an archive. Its visualizations depend on a moving baseline that constantly recalibrates as new searches occur. In this way, the disappearance of Coleman's graphs wasn't evidence of suppression but of the system functioning as designed. Yet the incident also revealed a communication gap between technical systems and public understanding, a gap that can easily breed mistrust. As weeks passed, the immediate buzz faded, but the questions it raised persisted. Coleman's measured commentary reminded observers that data itself is not truth. It's a lens, one that must be interpreted with care. Even accurate numbers can mislead if context is missing. Digital behavior is shaped by countless factors: curiosity, coincidence, repetition, or even automated scripts. What seems meaningful at first can later dissolve into randomness once more information emerges. In this sense, the real value of Coleman's work was not in what he found, but in how he approached it. His methodology, transparent, reproducible, and cautious, demonstrated the principles of ethical investigation in the digital age. He didn't aim to prove a theory. He aimed to ask the right questions and show others how to follow the evidence. The case also underscored how modern journalism increasingly depends on private platforms for access to public insight. The data that journalists use to understand society's behavior often sits behind automated systems governed by policies they don't control. If those systems change, so too can the narrative. The disappearance of a single dataset can reshape the way a story is understood, even if no human intended it. That realization has prompted renewed interest in independent archiving tools and the need for greater transparency in algorithmic design. Coleman's calm persistence stood in quiet contrast to the turbulence surrounding the story. He kept his tone factual, reiterating that his goal was observation, not accusation. Over time, his body of work became a touchstone in discussions about how citizens and journalists alike can use open-source data responsibly. His example showed that transparency is not merely about revealing what one finds, it is about showing precisely how one found it. The episode's aftermath revealed a subtle but important truth about digital life. Information online is not fixed, and meaning is often shaped as much by what disappears as by what remains. The collective curiosity surrounding Coleman's findings reflected a larger unease about the reliability of the systems that mediate our understanding of the world. If data can vanish or change without notice, what does that mean for accountability, memory, and truth in the digital era? These are not easy questions to answer. But by documenting his process publicly, Coleman ensured that the discussion could continue on a foundation of evidence rather than speculation. His work served as a reminder that technology's greatest strength, its ability to provide instant insight, is also its greatest vulnerability. The same algorithms that surface patterns can just as easily erase them when parameters shift. Even after the attention surrounding the case faded, the lessons remained. For many journalists and analysts, Coleman's investigation became an educational reference on both the potential and the pitfalls of open-source analysis. His cautious interpretation of data, his insistence on transparency, and his refusal to sensationalize uncertainty all contributed to a growing movement toward more responsible digital reporting. In the end, the mystery was never about whether something sinister had occurred within the dataset. It was about the impermanence of information itself and how easily meaning can dissolve when evidence is fluid. The quiet disappearance of a few lines on a chart became a metaphor for the entire information age, a reminder that truth, in a digital world, is always in motion. Baron Coleman's work endures not because it exposed wrongdoing, but because it illustrated integrity in practice. He showed that curiosity can coexist with caution, and that transparency remains the best defense against misunderstanding. His story invites reflection on how we interpret data, how we respond to ambiguity, and how we maintain trust when the sources of information lie beyond our control. Even now, years after those fleeting spikes vanished from public view, the discussion they sparked continues to echo in classrooms, newsrooms, and digital ethics forums. The lesson endures. Evidence can fade, but the responsibility to seek clarity never does. Stay informed, stay curious, and don't forget to subscribe for more deep investigations into the stories that matter.